The Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. Chair also asks unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. Chair now recognizes himself for the purposes of an opening statement for 5 minutes. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today to discuss the site selection process for a new Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, headquarters building. At some point, this committee is expected to receive an official General Services Administration prospectus requesting our authorization for a new FBI headquarters building. I will say up front, I'm not convinced the FBI needs a brand new building. While the world has become more dangerous, the FBI finds time to investigate parents at school board meetings and uses its resources to try and silence dissent across the country. So I'm not on board with the idea that the FBI needs a shiny new building at the taxpayer's expense, but what I may agree with the FBI on are the questions surrounding the current GSA site selection process, a process that this committee specifically oversees. The process to build a new FBI headquarters is probably a textbook example of why big government and bureaucracy is so bad, inefficient, and generally ineffective at the end of the day. This whole process started more than 15 years ago. 15 years ago. You think about if you're trying to build a new home for yourself and somebody told you you're going to probably have to wait 15 years. And I know I'm not casting aspersions on you two fine gentlemen, but that's America looks at that and says, what the heck's wrong with you folks? And after 15 years, there hasn't been a shovel in the ground. And of course, the cost has, as you know, ballooned, probably out of sight. Ironically, if it wasn't for the bureaucratic maze in politics, right now, there would already be a new FBI headquarters in Maryland or Virginia, likely. Going as far back as 2011, neither the FBI nor Congress thought it was realistic to rely on appropriated funds for the project. No one thought Congress would appropriate what grew to billions of dollars for new construction. The FBI, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, and members of this committee all expressed that if this was going to get done, it would need to be done as a public-private partnership, leveraging private financing. But they were all overruled by whom? Unelected bureaucrats in the executive branch who just don't like P3s or public-private partnerships. So it came as no great surprise when the GSA canceled the procurement in 2017 for a lack of funds, more precisely a shortfall of over $800 million. But when the Trump administration attempted to propose a more realistic solution, including a P3, the Democrats cried foul again and began investigations into allegations which again halted the project. Ironically, the current Department of Justice Inspector General found no evidence of any improper considerations or motives as the Democrats claimed at the time. So instead of going back to evaluate the FBI's current needs, language was slipped into an appropriations bill directing GSA to select from among 3 sites evaluated a decade ago. Again, so efficient, and I'm sure right in line with the FBI's mission and needs. The language went further to require GSA to consider not just mission requirements, but also sustainability and equity. So here we are today. To the witnesses, I get what you're doing, what the appropriations language has directed you to do, or I get that that's what you are doing. But now there are questions about the recent site selection process. During the process, GSA adjusted the weighting of the factors considered, including increasing the value giving to equity and decreasing the value for mission. I got to tell you, as a former member of the U.S. military, the mission is what drove everything I did. What time I woke up, how I dressed, how I prepared myself, what I ate. Every single thing I did was dependent on the mission. All the other stuff was irrelevant to me, and it should be the same for the FBI. It should be the same. They've got a very important job, and they need to remain focused on that. And it's not their fault in this regard that we have taken their eye off the prize. We have forced them to do that. GSA increased the value for cost, but is not clear what costs were considered. Ultimately, the site selection authority selected the Greenbelt, Maryland site, overruling the panel that was convened, and there appears to be little explanation as to why. So we convened a panel to do this, and once they came up with a decision, then it was countermanded, which begs the question, why even have the panel if you're just going to decide otherwise? I hope today we can get some answers as the committee prepares to review any proposal for the new FBI headquarters. Finally, I want to note we wanted to hear from Ms. Albert about her role in this process, and despite being invited well in advance, we learned just on Friday she would not appear before the subcommittee today. So we will no longer have a second panel, but we will be sending her a letter to continue to seek the answers we need, and we'll have to consider other options available to the subcommittee so that we can hear her perspective in the future, which will be very important to getting to the bottom of this issue. With that, I yield. I now recognize the Ranking Member Titus, for 5 minutes for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. Thank you both for coming to help us understand this process better. I'd like to go back over some of the history, too, that's been mentioned by the chairman, but just to put a point on it. In 2011, both the GSA and FBI developed plans for a new consolidated suburban headquarters for the FBI. The plan cited the need for a new building, defined its requirements, and recommended the use of a public-private partnership via a ground lease back with a private developer. GSA's plans also call for an 11 B report, which recommended federal construction, which would require upfront full appropriations. By 2017, however, after years of work by the GSA and the FBI, authorization by this committee and the Senate Committee on the Environment and Public Works, an extensive environmental impact study process, a complex request for information and request for a proposal process with the private sector, a shifting program of requirements, funding strategy revisions, changes in the leadership of the FBI, the GSA, and the White House, and multiple requests for funding, all of that, the GSA canceled the procurement citing insufficient funding. In 2018, the Senate required GSA to submit a revised plan for the project. That plan was also frustrating. Attempting to justify FBI Director Ray's newfound desire to remain on Pennsylvania Avenue, the plan claimed that tearing down the Hoover building and rebuilding a new facility on the site could be accomplished for the same cost as building a new suburban campus, whether that campus was to be in Virginia or in Maryland. What the 2018 plan did not acknowledge was that GSA determined they could build a new building for the same price because they were going to shrink the workforce, as they planned on moving more than 2,000 FBI staff to other FBI facilities around the country. Excuse me. At the time, GSA also avoided mentioning that a building on Pennsylvania Avenue could not possibly meet the highest level of security required for federal construction, otherwise known as Interagency Security Committee Level 5. Then the FY 2022 Consolidated Appropriations Act directed GSA to select a site from one of the three that had been included in GSA's 2017 prospectus. There were two in Maryland and one in Virginia. That process and the action of GSA's site selection officials is what we need to talk about today. And I'm confident that some of our questions about the process will be resolved after this discussion. I don't want to wait, however, to examine the structural weaknesses in the previous FBI headquarters procurement process, so hopefully we can avoid those same mistakes in the future. The last time around, I believe GSA obfuscated and evaded. Questions about funding differences and strategies were never answered. Details about the market value of the Hoover building were never produced. Shortcomings in the 2018 plan were never acknowledged, and I do believe that some of the GSA staff at the time were less than truthful to Congress. At this hearing, I'll be looking, like the chairman, for information about GSA's procurement strategy and funding needs. I want to know how GSA is going to provide the FBI with the secure, modern facility that it needs, one where hunks of concrete aren't falling out of the ceiling onto the desk of employees. The current Hoover building is the only level 5 federal facility in the midst of an urban area. It is a counterintelligence disaster just waiting to happen, and as such is a threat to our national security. We cannot forget our commitment to providing our law enforcement with the tools they need to protect all Americans. So again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here, and I look forward to having some of these questions addressed. I yield back.
The chair thanks the gentlewoman. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for calling today's hearing to examine the site selection process for the FBI headquarters, and thanks to our witnesses for participating. Commissioner Dooms, let me officially welcome you back to the subcommittee. I'm sure you'd be more comfortable over here than where you're sitting today, but it's always a pleasure to have former staff testify before us. GSA, the FBI, and Congress have worked together from 2011 through 2018 to put the FBI in a new building that would meet the FBI's current and future security, space, and operational requirements. Those efforts to date have failed. In 2022, Congress directed the GSA to start the process again by picking one of the 3 sites identified in the first procurement. Last month, as we know, GSA selected the site in Greenbelt, Maryland, but multiple parties have expressed concern about that decision. While those concerns are being examined by GSA's Inspector General, it is useful for this committee to understand how and why the first procurement failed, so we can help GSA and FBI avoid repeating the same mistakes in the future. I want to hear from GSA what the agency learned from the previous failure and what steps are being taken to ensure success this time around. For instance, is the GSA prepared to carry out a project of this magnitude? I also want to hear from GSA and FBI about their plans to secure the funding needed to complete the project. Finally, I'd like to know the effect on the FBI's staff and operational capabilities if a new headquarters building is not built in the near future. The FBI has an important mission, and its employees deserve a safe, secure, and functional workspace. So I look forward to discussing how this committee can help to ensure the FBI has the headquarters it needs today and in the future. With that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Briefly, I'd like to take a moment to explain our lighting system to our witnesses. There are 3 lights in front of you. Green means go, yellow means you're running out of time, and red means to conclude your remarks. And hopefully they'll keep working. If they don't, we'll just be on the lookout for that because we had a little issue at the beginning of the hearing. I ask unanimous consent that the witness's full statements be included in the record without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that each one of our witnesses limit their oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Mr. Dooms, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Titus, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Elliot Dooms, and I am the Commissioner of the Public Building Service at GSA. I am honored to appear before the subcommittee to discuss GSA's site selection for the FBI headquarters. My written testimony goes into detail on the extensive history of the project, so in the interest of time, I will start in 2022, when the search for a suburban headquarters was restarted in earnest by Congress. The fiscal year 2022 Appropriations Act directed GSA to expeditiously select a headquarters site from among one of the 3 previously identified sites in Virginia and Maryland. In September 2022, GSA released its site selection plan. Subsequently, in December 2022, Congress passed the fiscal year 2023 Appropriations Act, which directed GSA to pause its site selection process and conduct separate consultations with Maryland and Virginia officials before resuming with the selection. GSA and FBI held these consultations in March of 2023, and after carefully considering what was shared by both jurisdictions, GSA released an update to the plan in July 2023. The updates, made in close collaboration with the FBI, adjusted weights to reflect new government-wide directives and provide better taxpayer value. It also changed the site selection authority to the PBS commissioner. Consistent with GSA's commitment to transparency, the updates to the criteria and weighting were shared publicly. Following the release of the updated plan, GSA resumed the site selection process. Extensive information was compiled about each site, including information received from both delegations during the consultation process. The panel, which was comprised of 2 GSA employees and 1 FBI employee, convened to review the information about the sites and submitted their report to the Site Selection Authority. With this report in hand, the authority was then responsible for, quote, fully evaluating all attributes of the sites and selecting the site which is truly most advantageous to the government, regardless of the recommendation provided by the panel, close quote. This is GSA's typical process. As explained in detail in the site selection decision, the Site Selection Authority determined that Greenbelt was the best option for the FBI and the public. Greenbelt was chosen because, as outlined in the decision document, Greenbelt provides the best access to transportation and is the most transit accessible. It provides the government with the greatest project schedule certainty, offers the greatest opportunity to positively impact the Washington, D.C. region, and has the lowest overall cost to taxpayers of all the 3 sites. The decision report is publicly available and details the authority's analysis and ratings for all criteria for each site. Since the site selection announcement, some stakeholders have raised questions about the process and decision. Let me clarify those misconceptions with a few facts. The Site Selection Authority did not inappropriately change the panel's recommendation. The Site Selection Authority is the only official charged with making a decision and is charged with exercising independent judgment. In fact, during the down select in 2014, from dozens of potential headquarters sites down to 3 finalists, the Site Selection Authority rejected the site selection's unanimous recommendation to exclude the Springfield site. Number 2, the Site Selection Authority did not change the criteria. As is clear in the final agency decision, the Site Selection Authority operated under the same July 2023 site selection plan that governed the panel. Number 3, the Site Selection Authority did not make changes in favor of a specific site. Rather, the Site Selection Authority carefully followed the plan and documented their assessments. In those instances where the Site Selection Authority differed with the panel, the reason for those differences are fully explained in the decision document. And number 4, GSA conducted the site selection process in full compliance with all ethical laws, regulations, and policies. This includes those concerning potential conflicts of interest. GSA ran a fair and transparent process and followed the publicly outlined plan. The site selection decision, as well as the panel's evaluation and recommendation, are all available on our website. GSA has also released correspondence between GSA and FBI, including the legal review conducted by GSA's Office of General Counsel in response to the FBI's questions. We took the questions they raised seriously, and we welcome a review of our processes and our conclusion. We believe the record reflects that our decision-making official made this determination according to the plan and the process, and in the best interests of the FBI and the public. Throughout this project, GSA has acted pursuant to directives enacted into law. The next step is for GSA to develop and submit a prospectus to Congress, and we are working with the FBI on that document. In closing, I want to note that while GSA may disagree with the FBI about this phase of the process, there is no disagreement about the need for a new headquarters here in the Washington region. This is a national security imperative. GSA remains committed to working with the FBI and this committee on this important project. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Chair, thank you, Mr. Dooms. The chair now recognizes Mr. Demas for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Titus, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to discuss the new FBI headquarters project with you today. My name is Nick Demos, and I'm a career employee at the FBI and serve as the Chief Financial Officer, and I'm responsible for all FBI facilities. I have been the lead FBI executive coordinating with GSA on the new headquarters plan for the past couple years. The FBI J. Edgar Hoover building, referred to as JEH, is quite frankly failing. Netting is placed around the perimeter to prevent falling concrete from hitting pedestrians. Concrete deterioration is occurring inside the building as well, with instances of concrete even falling over employee workspaces and equipment. Pipe bursts and plumbing challenges are commonplace, leading to the damage of FBI space, IT, and records. JEH power and network infrastructure challenges are ever present, resulting in disruptions to connectivity needed to coordinate FBI cases nationwide. From a cost perspective, the government is currently spending millions of dollars for expensive commercial leases in the NCR, as the FBI workforce is scattered across multiple locations beyond JEH. The headquarters plan will consolidate these sites and reflects the thousands of positions that the FBI has already relocated to Huntsville, Alabama, and other locations outside the National Capital Region. The current proposal will allow for a smaller footprint in the NCR compared to our request back in 2017. Now, with the need for a facility so great, the FBI and GSA committed to establishing a fair and transparent process by which a site would be selected. The GSA and FBI together succeeded in this process goal through so much of the project. However, in the final weeks of the process, the FBI identified process concerns that we were unable to resolve with GSA. First, when the SSA provided their report to us in August, we were surprised to see that the SSA came to a different conclusion than the site selection panel's consensus recommendation. The site selection plan allowed for this divergence, but I can say that within the FBI's own procurement shop, this is exceedingly rare. Second, when the FBI reviewed the SSA's decision report, we observed that the SSA prioritized sub-criteria in a way that was inconsistent with the published plan and applied outside information that repeatedly benefited the Greenbelt site and disadvantaged the Springfield site compared to the panel recommendation. The site selection plan gave the SSA authority to come to a different conclusion than the panel, but the consistent one-directional nature of the changes favoring Greenbelt caused concerns for the FBI. These concerns were exacerbated by the fact that the SSA's immediate prior employer was the owner of the Greenbelt site. The FBI raised its concerns in a briefing and through 2 letters to GSA. To move the project forward, the FBI requested GSA select a new SSA to rerun the final step of the process, picking an individual who did not have any previous affiliation with the 3 sites. Ultimately, GSA did not accept this request and our concerns were not sufficiently addressed. To be clear, the FBI does not object to the Greenbelt location itself, and we are not suggesting a lack of integrity on the part of the SSA. However, for a decision of this magnitude, the process needs to be above reproach, and we continue to hold concerns about how the final stage of the process was conducted. The FBI needs a new facility here in the National Capital Region. The status quo is a drain on taxpayer dollars to sustain a failing JEH facility that doesn't meet the needs of our workforce or mission. But the fairness and transparency of the process are essential, and we welcome the GSA Office of Inspector General's review of the site selection process. It is not easy, nor do we take lightly, that we have raised this area of disagreement. The FBI is grateful to the dedicated public servants at GSA who have worked tirelessly to support the FBI's new headquarters project. We look forward to the OIG's review so that we can continue forward with GSA to construct a new facility with the support of Congress. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Chair thanks the witness and each of you for your testimony. We will now turn to questions for our witnesses. The chair will now recognize himself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Dooms, you just said in your testimony that the criteria was not changed, but in July, didn't the SSA or others change the weighting of the criteria?
Congressman, thank you for that question. In July of 2023, the criteria did change, but it was done in collaboration.
So it changed, right? You just said there were no changes, but changing the weighting of the criteria is a change in itself. Is that correct?
Yes, Congressman.
That's correct, right? So you're the regional commissioner. You make these decisions across the board for this capital region for a number of different projects, and have done that, I would imagine, successfully. That's why you're in the job. Is that right?
Congressman, yes, I do.
You're the regional commission. Did you have any involvement with this site selection process at all?
Congressman, yes. I
Okay.
was involved with the consultations that were mandated by Congress in the December 2023 request by Congress to consult with the Maryland and Virginia. So
And who was the
involved with
authority prior to July when it changed? Who was the authority in this?
a career official.
A career official that you know and you deal with?
Yes, Congressman.
And does that career official report to you on these matters?
No, Congressman.
Who does the
Well,
career-
now she does, yes.
Now
At
she
the
does.
time.
Why not before?
The way the GSA is set up, the regional commissioner for the National Capital Region reported directly to the Public Building Service Commissioner.
Directly to the service commissioner. All right, well, I'm just very curious as to why in July, after all this time, remember, this is 15 years going. In July, all of a sudden, we need to appoint somebody new at the top of this who eventually overruled the site selection committee's criteria. Mr. Demos, if Congress had not slipped language into the FY23 appropriations bill, which directed the FBI to only consider 3 sites in Maryland and Virginia, would these represent the optimal sites for the FBI, the ones that are now required?
Chairman Perry, going back to 2018, really right up through the appropriations language in 2022, it was the FBI's position that the optimal solution was to be in a newly constructed building closer to downtown Washington, given the proximity to DOJ and other partners in the more downtown region.
And what's that? Is that based on mission? I don't want to put words in your mouth. What's that based on? The
Sure.
optimal location.
Sure, in terms of the level of interaction that we would have with the Department of Justice, with the U.S. Attorney's Office, with the National Security Council, with other law enforcement partners downtown. It was also a centrally located area for our workforce and for other sites that we have in the National Capital Region. We have a number of sites in the NCR, and being in a centralized location was our preferred approach. Obviously, when the appropriation was passed in March 2022, we heeded that direction and began the process.
Right,
with
I
GSA.
understand you didn't have any choice, but I find it interesting that people not related at all to your mission, and quite honestly, while there are times where I might disagree with your mission, specifically the spying on American citizens and targeting American citizens, but I would think the FBI would know best what its mission requirements are. And I'm wondering about undue influence, whether it's from Congress or the GSA. Mr. Dooms, in areas where Ms. Albert disagreed with the panel seemed to always accrue benefit to Greenbelt. She overruled the panel when evaluating transportation access, site development, flexibility, schedule risk, and sustainability and equity, all in favor of Greenbelt. And interesting to me, and I think the public, the acquisition cost for Greenbelt went from over $200 million to now $26 million. That's a lot of money, right? $174 million. What changed? That's a lot of money. What changed in that site?
Congressman, thank you for that question. My understanding is that WMATA, who owns the site, has offered it to GSA at the price that we cited in the site selection decision, $26.2 million.
So what changed from the acquisition cost for Greenbelt? It's the same site. I understand WMATA, but it went from $200 million to $26 million. Now, you're the regional commissioner. What changed? Who's subsidizing this lowered cost? Somebody's got to pay for something here. And is the parking lot literally worth $174 million?
Congressman, I'll have to get back to you on that. My understanding is that the site is valued at $26.2 million and that WMATA has offered to sell it to GSA at that price.
But you would also agree that it's a reduction in cost that was over $200 million.
I'll have to get back to you on that, Congressman.
Well, my time is now expired for this round, so at this point, I will yield and recognize the gentlelady, the ranking member from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would think you'd like the fact that it went from 200 million down to 26. That sounds like that's right up your alley. Excuse me for that aside. I want to ask you about the high mission criticality score, if you could, Mr. Demos. The Homeland Security, there's a 2021 edition of a risk management process study, and it said, and I quote, facilities that house individuals or specialized equipment necessary to identify and analyze threats to Homeland Security have to have this high mission criticality score. Do you think you can achieve that kind of facility protection if you stayed and remodeled the building on Pennsylvania Avenue?
Congresswoman, at this stage, the work that we've conducted over the last couple years has been focused on the March 2022 congressional appropriation. And so our focus has been on developing a process to select a suburban site from one of those three locations. In terms of talking about specific security requirements, we can follow up separately with right level of security experts to talk through that. But my focus with GSA over the last couple of years has been specifically on selecting from one of the three suburban sites. With then, in addition to that, the 2024 President's budget did include support for a smaller facility downtown for 750 to 1,000 people that we're coordinating with GSA on.
So in the meantime, while y'all have been looking at these new sites, you've just let the facility on Pennsylvania deteriorate, not try to fix it, not try to improve it, just let it go to hell while you're looking for something else?
Thank you for that question. So my staff and I am responsible in coordination with GSA for ensuring the building is maintained. And I will say it is a challenging situation in terms of the concrete mitigation, the pipe repair, the HVAC support. And I've got a heroic team of experts who work to maintain the facility to the best of their ability. What I would say is it is a trade-off of knowing that this conversation has been ongoing about a new facility. We want to invest in the building to ensure that we're keeping it stable and safe, and at the same time, not invest too much funding such that it would be imprudent, knowing that there's ultimately a vision to leave the facility.
How much money do you think you've spent on keeping it up to date since the 2011 when you decided you wanted a new building?
I can't speak for everything since 2011. I would say over the last several years, with the support of Congress, we were required to reprioritize about $75 million just to address core water infrastructure to ensure we didn't have a catastrophic breakdown of our water intake and outtake from the building. We're also having to invest
besides the structural improvements to keep the employees safe, what about security issues? Investment in keeping all that information secure.
Sure. So security is a key area of focus for the FBI to ensure our space is safe, our people are safe, our records and IT are safe. And so we have made incremental security investments to the facility to ensure that in terms of the things we can feasibly do, we're doing them. There are, of course, many security features that we cannot implement given the 1974 construction, and so we do the best we can for modest security improvements.
You don't want to make it too nice or too good, because then that might hurt your chances of getting a new building, right?
Congresswoman, we want to make sure we have limited resources in order to support the building, and to the maximum extent possible, I want those resources to go towards combating violent crime, human trafficking, international
Okay,
terrorism.
let me ask you this. The 2018 plan included a SCIF, a SIOC, 72-hour backup power, mission briefing center, blast and ballistic protection, visitor center, parking garage, remote truck inspection facility, perimeter security, and upgraded IT. Can you talk about, does any of that still exist or been worked on, or what's the scope of the current project? Does it include all of that stuff?
So those specific requirements that you've listed there would be the ones that would be included in our construction plan for the suburban campus that we will be working with GSA on kind of going forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields. The chairman now recognizes the chairman of the Aviation Subcommittee, Mr. Graves from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both of you for being here. I want to thank you for your testimony. Mr. Dooms, I understand how you may be shocked that folks are questioning criteria and criteria being changed, but I do want to just give you a little bit of perspective on the things that we deal with. In this committee, you can imagine billions and billions of dollars in, for example, transportation grants have been given to the Department of Transportation. And as we've gone through and looked at the allocation of dollars and we've looked at the criteria that this Department of Transportation has developed, we've watched as 17% of the overall money has been given to the state of California, while 0.33% of the money has been awarded to the state of Alabama. Those states, you can say, well, maybe it's population. Those states have an 8-fold difference in population, yet that is a 51-fold difference in the amount of allocation among states. So said another way, I have observed how criteria has been manipulated in a way to benefit specific states, areas, or projects that I think otherwise do not stand on their own merit. So I want you to understand that backdrop under which you're showing up here. So in that regard, it is my understanding that criteria was changed, and you've noted the scoring issue that the chairman noted. Were you asked, did anyone come to you and ask you to change that criteria, or are you aware of anyone from above, from White House, political appointees, or any others that asked that criteria be changed, or that the weighted of the scoring be changed?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. What happened was in December of 2022, Congress directed GSA and the FBI to conduct consultations, meaningful consultations with the state of Maryland and Virginia. We held those consultations in March of 2023. And then we worked collaboratively with our partners over at the FBI to come up with new criteria. And the changes we made in the criteria, I think it's really important to talk about that. One was we decided to increase the percentage of cost. We thought it was really desirable to increase our focus on providing the lowest cost option for taxpayers. And then we had government-wide directives related to equity that we felt like we needed to reflect. And I will point out that mission remains the #1 priority in the new set of criteria. But we worked on that collaboratively with our partners with the FBI, and they wrote and they let us know that they appreciate it.
Okay, and I appreciate that dialogue and engagement, and I certainly respect that and think it's important. But just going back to my question, was there a political appointee, White House, or anyone that asked you or asked anyone within GSA to actually change the criteria or change the weight of the criteria? So putting aside state engagement and all those, was there anyone along those lines?
So let me clarify. We had both political appointees and career officials within GSA meeting with career officials with the FBI to come up with this new criteria.
Yep.
So no one outside of the agency, sir.
Right. So it is. I'm gonna surmise here. So it is fair to say that there were political appointees that weighed in on this and asked that the criteria be changed or that the weight of the scoring be changed.
Yes, there were political appointees that were a part of that process, Congressman.
Thank you, thank you. I'm not sure which one of you to ask this question to, but I certainly understand the accessibility of the site as being really important. You want employees to be able to actually get to work. And I understand that the site that you chose ranked the highest in terms of transit accessibility, but then you also have the requirement, at least in the previous scope, to provide thousands of parking spots. And I just want to make sure I understand that situation, and happy to take an answer from either of you.
Sure. So for our workforce, we were definitely advocating strongly to ensure max level of access to mass transportation, metro rail, regional rail, bus lines, as well as accessibility to kind of sites in the region. In addition to that, certainly there is going to come a time as we work through the program of requirements in more detail leading up to the prospectus, where we will be having significant discussions about the level of parking that would be included on the site. Something like that about the amount of parking, those details will be kind of more heavily discussed towards the next stage of the process.
And Director Demos, thank you. I'm out of time. Mr. Chairman, I just want to say it would be very helpful if you all could help us understand the relationship between how you scored the transit, parking, and then also if you looked at actually making investments in new infrastructure to improve the score for either one of those sites. Yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Dooms. I don't think anyone's arguing that the SSA has the legal authority to make a decision that is not recommended by a panel. In this case, the panel that made the recommendations. But do you know overall in the history, let's say 25 years, how often the SSA has come up with a different final recommendation that's a decision different than a recommendation panel?
Oh, thank you for that question, Congressman. To my knowledge, GSA does not keep a comprehensive database of all the site selection decisions, but when we asked the staff to take a look at it, it's happened a couple of times in the last 25 years. More specifically, with the FBI case. In 2016, when GSA was asked to do the first down select, a panel of career officials recommended several sites, and they excluded Springfield. And the deputy PBS commissioner at the time decided not to accept that recommendation and decided, using their authority, to add Springfield as one of the sites to be considered. There's a second instance in 2006 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where the site selection panel recommended 3 sites to the site selection authority, and the PBS commissioner at the time rejected all 3 sites and chose another site that was not even under consideration by the site selection panel. So that was, yes, in 2006.
Were either of those subject to a further IG investigation as this one is?
I'm sorry, Congressman.
Were either of those selections subject to an IG investigation as this one is?
Not to my knowledge, Congressman.
Yeah. Okay. And if you could get back to us with any further examples, that'd be helpful. It doesn't sound like there are a lot. Not just the numerator, but maybe the denominator as well. How many potential decisions were made, and then how many were different?
Yes, sir.
And not just in an FBI case, any case.
I'm sorry?
Not just in an FBI case, but in any case.
In any case, yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks. Just help us, give us a perspective. Mr. Demos, as noted just now, in the first procurement, the proximity of a site to the FBI's Quantico facility was not included, and then it was added. Do you have insight from the FBI's perspective about why that particular criteria was changed and Quantico was added?
Sure. So really, as I said earlier, going back to 2018 to 2022, really the view of the FBI was that having that central proximity to partners and to other mission assets was very important. We have employees traveling back and forth to sites all the time, meeting with other law enforcement partners, intelligence community partners. And so being in downtown Washington, it allowed for that central location. hearing Congress loud and clear in March of 2022 that we needed to select a site from one of the 3 suburban locations, we tried to reflect on kind of that base kind of requirement of how do we be in close proximity to our other mission sites. Quantico is the largest mission site that we have in the National Capital Region other than the Hoover Building itself. And so as we talked to a lot of stakeholders within the FBI about what would enable the mission for the long haul, being in close proximity to that site and other sites in the area was deemed valuable. For example, we did a study, a 60-day study of looking at the amount of meetings and back and forth between Quantico and sites that were...
Can I stop you there? How relevant is that in a post-COVID era, an application of online, especially secured online? Because we do VTCs overseas all the time on the military side.
In a post-COVID era, like I said, we did a 60-day assessment between Quantico and other sites, 1,700 trips in a 60-day period between headquarter sites that are consolidating. In law enforcement work, face-to-face engagement is needed and common.
It is needed and common. Is it? I'm not questioning it. Only I just want to. I am questioning it for the sake of understanding. Is that as relevant though, given the advancement of technologies to actually replace not every face-to-face meeting, some face-to-face meetings. I want face-to-face meetings all the time too, but I don't get that choice. I'm not in your position. I get it, but we have a very important job too, and that requires face-to-face as well as having to flex sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Technology is certainly a really powerful enabler, but from the data research that we did, we are still seeing a significant amount of that direct face-to-face, and it is powerful. And the FBI, just by the nature of our mission, we are heavy users of our space coming into the office, using our secret, top secret connectivity.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes a gentleman from New York, Mr. D'Esposito.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I missed the opening statements, but Mr. Demos, can you just tell me what year you joined the FBI or started working with the FBI?
Sure, 2006.
Great. And can you just explain to me what the #1 mission of the FBI is?
Countering and stopping acts of terrorism, sir.
Okay, so to protect and defend the United States of America against terrorist and foreign intelligence threats.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Given that mission to protect and defend the United States of America against threats and enforce criminal laws to protect its citizens, I would think that it would be the main priority to be considered when selecting a site for a new headquarters. Would you say that during the selection process, this was considered above all other factors?
Ensuring the mission of the FBI and how facilities can support the mission of the FBI has absolutely been at the forefront of our requirement.
Okay. And do you think that the decision as of this past July to change the site selection criteria by lowering the weight of the, quote, FBI proximity to mission-related locations and increasing the weight of, quote, advancing equity, puts the FBI's readiness and advancing its mission at risk?
Congressman, we viewed the September 2022 site selection plan as optimal. However, we did work closely with the GSA, ultimately in the leading up to the July 2023 revisions to the plan. And while we thought that the September 2022 plan was best, we also deferred to GSA's judgment on the final percentages in the July publication of the plan.
Okay, so what I'm going to do real quick is I'm just going to read verbatim the actual mission of the FBI. The mission of the FBI is to protect and defend the United States against terrorist and foreign intelligence threats, to uphold and enforce the criminal laws of the United States, and to provide leadership and criminal justice services to federal, state, municipal, and international agencies and partners. So with that mission in our thoughts, I'm finding it hard to understand why we would lower the weight of the proximity to mission-related locations and increase the weight of advancing equity. And I understand that you worked with the agencies that were involved, there was communication, I understand all that. But what I am trying to understand is why we would lower the weight of the FBI proximity to mission-related locations and increase the weight of advancing equity when trying to find proper locations in order for us to put forth the mission of the FBI. So if you could expand on that a little bit, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Congressman. As I said, of course, our number one priority in this was ensuring that this facility could support the mission of the FBI first and foremost, hard stop, sir. With that said, we do know there were other factors that needed to be evaluated as part of a decision of this magnitude. Cost was one of those areas as well. If you compare the September 2022 plan compared to the July 2023 plan, the importance of cost did change from 10% to 20%. And so it was a balancing act of multiple factors.
Under the Biden administration, costs have increased across the board in every aspect. But what I'm asking here is, how did equity become to play a bigger role in this? And how does advancing equity allow us to better the mission of the FBI? That's where I'm not understanding. I understand the cost analysis. I understand the conversations that were had. I understand that you worked with the inner agencies of the FBI to figure out the better locations. What I am trying to understand in the next 30 seconds, if you could explain to me how advancing equity helps better live out the mission of the FBI.
So what I'd say to the equity criteria, sir, is that there were 2 executive orders that were signed regarding equity and real estate decisions. And so the FBI and GSA had coordinated to also ensure that the site selection plan appropriately complied with executive orders.
And when were those executive orders signed?
The first was signed in 2021, and the second, I believe, was in 2022, sir, but I could be wrong.
So basically, we're following bad executive orders in order to promote politics instead of actually living out the mission of the FBI. Not on you. You guys are just following the rules. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Dooms, it's good to have you back on Capitol Hill. You were one of my best Hill staffers, and I have worked with, so it's good to see you in this new role. Of course, we were sad to lose you. I want to discuss with you, Mr. Dooms, GSA's site selection process for the new FBI headquarters. But first, I want to discuss the future use of this site of the FBI's current headquarters here on Pennsylvania Avenue in my district. The current site is a prime opportunity for mixed-use development, which could help activate Pennsylvania Avenue, draw visitors off the National Mall and into downtown, as well as generate tax revenue for the District of Columbia here in my district. What is GSA's plan for the current site after the FBI moves? And is GSA committed to working with the District of Columbia as it plans for the future use of the site?
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. I just want to be clear. GSA does have a plan for this site. We are working through it, and the commitment I'm willing to make here with you today is to work with your office as well as local District of Columbia officials about what that future use of that site might be. As you may be aware, as other members of the committee, GSA is currently have a national portfolio plan that we're working on where we're looking at the entire inventory, all 363 1.3 million square feet of space that we have across this country, and we're looking for opportunities to dispose of sites. You may have seen that about a month ago, GSA announced that we were disposing of 23 properties across this country because we determined that we no longer had a need for it. So we would do that same asset segmentation policy for the J. Edgar Hoover site. And if we determine that it is surplus to the needs of the government, we would then work on a disposal strategy through our Good Neighbor program with our Office of Chief Architect to work with the local authorities and your office about what the future might be for that site, including up to disposition.
Thank you, Mr. Dooms. The site selection plan for the new FBI headquarters established a site selection panel and a site selection authority, Mr. Dooms. What were the respective responsibilities of the panel and the selection authority?
I really appreciate that question, Congresswoman, because I'd like to clarify for the record. The site selection panel was assembled to make recommendations to the Site Selection Authority, which is common for all GSA site selections. This expert panel, made up of two career experts, were expected to go through all the information that was provided by all of the jurisdictions, examine all the issues as outlined in the site selection plan, which GSA made publicly available. And it was always contemplated that the site selection panel would make a recommendation to the Site Selection Authority. And I think it's important to clarify that the Site Selection Authority looked at the 12 sub-criteria across the 5 criteria, and subsequently, the Site Selection Authority accepted 9 of the 12 recommendations that the Site Selection Panel made. For the 3 criteria, where the Site Selection Authority did not accept the recommendations of the Site Selection Panel, the Site Selection Authority, in the site selection decision, carefully went through and explained why they did not accept those 3 recommendations. And this is why we consider this one of the most transparent site selection processes that GSA is ever involved in. We have not typically released the site selection plan and the site selection criteria, or the detailed site selection decision, where we went through in a painstaking way, in a 40-page decision, explaining why the Site Selection Authority, on 3 of the 12 recommendations that the Site Selection Panel made, did not accept them. And the Site Selection Authority very clearly outlined that this was a close question. As the FBI has acknowledged, all 3 sites meet their mission needs, but it was our job to determine which of those 3 sites best met their needs. And we decided, and GSA made the decision, that the Greenbelt site was the most transit-oriented site. It was the lowest cost to the taxpayers. It advanced, the one that advanced the presidential directive on equity and sustainability the most, and also offered the most project certainty. And we thought those were all the reasons that the Greenbelt, Maryland site was the best site for taxpayers.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes a gentleman from Mississippi, Representative Zell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dooms, I'd like to start with you. Thank you for being here today and our witnesses. We appreciate it. But how often do political appointees at GSA disagree with the recommended decision of GSA career experts?
Congressman, that's a great question. It's hard to give you a comprehensive answer, but we can cite to at least one other instance where the political head of the GSA Public Building Service overturned a site selection panel decision. It was in 2006 with the siting of the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania courthouse. The site selection panel made a recommendation of 3 sites, and the Site Selection Authority actually chose a 4th site that was not under consideration by the site selection panel.
Thank you. Do we have a detailed record that document instances when a political appointee has been designated the role of the Site Selection Authority?
I don't believe we have a detailed document, but GSA has endeavored to look through past decisions and look for instances. Here in an earlier case with the FBI in 2016, the site selection panel recommended that the Springfield site be excluded from any consideration. And the Site Selection Authority decided not to accept that recommendation and that GSA should consider the Springfield site.
I understand that the weights were changed for all criteria, and the expert panel still chose Springfield, yet a political appointee chose Greenbelt. To me, it seems like there was a directive from the White House to ensure Greenbelt emerged as the preferred choice. In between the panel's recommendation and the final report, was there any directive from the White House?
No, sir.
Would you be willing to share any documents or correspondence that may have come from the White House, GSA, and the executive branch, if there's any documents?
Congressman, I'm committed to working with you to produce any correspondence if it exists. I'm not sure that it does, but I'll work with the Office of General Counsel to get you that information.
Thank you. Mr. Demos, given the FBI's preference to stay in downtown D.C., do you believe the FBI would ever truly accept a decision to move the headquarters out of downtown D.C.?
Congressman, thank you for the question. What we said throughout the process from when Congress passed the law in March of 2022 till today is, as long as a fair and transparent process is followed, we will follow the law. And the law said that the FBI shall go to one of those 3 suburban sites. And that has not changed, sir.
How do you respond to the allegations that Director Carnahan said the FBI's concerns with the process had no merit? And do you feel this process was fair and transparent?
Thank you, sir. So this is an area of disagreement between the FBI and the GSA. We have identified process concerns, as you even alluded to, in the fact that it is exceedingly rare that a site selection panel's recommendation is not accepted by the site selection authority. Even within our own FBI procurement shop, we canvassed our lead contracting officers, and it was exceedingly rare that such a situation had occurred. Combining that with the number of instances where there was a disagreement between the panel and the site selection authority, we're concerned to see that just so consistently the disagreement by the SSA led to an increase to the Greenbelt site and a decrease to the Springfield site. And again, just exacerbated by the fact that the SSA was ultimately senior executive by the owner of the Greenbelt site. Those things taken in aggregate just created areas of process concern for us, sir.
Thank you very much. And thank you both for being here today. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Kansas, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the Chairman and the Ranking Member, Ms. Titus, for holding this hearing today. And then, of course, thank you to our witnesses for taking the time to testify. I represent the 3rd District in Kansas, which is part of the greater Kansas City metro area and home to a pretty significant federal real asset footprint. And like a lot of places in the country with this kind of federal nexus, we do depend on the GSA to serve as a good steward of taxpayer resources and to serve as a fair landlord in our communities. And those expectations, of course, are no different for the assessment of a location, selection and construction for the new FBI headquarters. So I do want to focus on the expressed needs that are at the center of this hearing, and some of this is a follow-up to some of the questioning we've heard from Ranking Member Titus and others. Mr. Demos, I'd like to hear, since the GSA and FBI began working on this project in 2011, can you tell me how many FBI employees have been moved from the National Capital Region, or NCR, to other FBI sites around the country?
Sure. So over the last several years, to your question, Congresswoman, the FBI has gone through a reassessment of the geographic location of our workforce. One particularly significant site for us has been our expanded presence in Huntsville, Alabama. We've actually been in Huntsville for 50 years through the Hazardous Devices School. But over the last decade in particular, a renewed investment for Huntsville, for technology positions, a training academy. At this point, we now have nearly 2,000 individuals in Huntsville today. we've also increased our presence in Pocatello, Idaho, and increased our presence and functions in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Of course, we operate 56 separate field offices across the country. Over the past several years, we've also looked at opportunities of taking headquarters positions and pushing them back out to the field offices to ensure that we're supporting our field operatives where the cases are being run.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about how the calculation was made of the FBI employees in the new building over the course? I mean, it's been quite a few different years, or quite a few years. Can you talk a little bit about how that calculation plays into the site selection decision?
I just want to make sure I understand your question, Congresswoman. Can you just restate it for me, please?
Yeah, so I'm curious how when looking at the various sites in the site selection process, how are you thinking about the calculation with the employees that are going to be at the new headquarters with the movement of employees to places like Huntsville or Idaho?
Sure. So we've done an assessment of what are those functions that we think can operate effectively outside of the national capital region. Also, in particular, thinking about where we may have partners in other parts of the country where it may be valuable to be co-located with those partners. Not all partners are in the NCR. And also looking at where we quite frankly have available real estate. We had available real estate in Clarksburg, West Virginia, to be able to transition employees. And so kind of the net of that is, we still have a large multi-thousand presence here in the national capital region for those functions that we believe are important to be in close proximity to intelligence community partners, law enforcement partners here in the NCR, as well as having access to the tech talent of the vendor community. We rely on industry to support us in some of our high-tech mission space, and this is a region of the country that has a lot of tech industry.
Thank you. And then because it'll be 30 seconds hopefully for you to answer, Mr. Dooms, I'm curious if you could just, to follow on Mr. D'Esposito's line of questioning, the ability for folks to get to the building using transit and the parking situation, is that part of the equity consideration when deciding where that falls in terms of the priority levels?
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. Actually, one of the criteria dealt expressly with transportation access and transit access. The Greenbelt site is 0.1 miles away from the metro station as opposed to Springfield, 0.5. There were also some other sub-criteria that dealt with the commercial airports and their proximity to that. But that is separate and apart from the criteria that deals with equity and sustainable development.
Okay, thanks. I just was curious and didn't know. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Representative Cohen.
Thank you, Chairman Perry. I appreciate you and the ranking member for holding the hearing and the chairman for allowing me to wave onto this subcommittee. Appreciate the witnesses for being here. Certainly great interest in the GSA site selection process for the new FBI headquarters. My interest is more in how we're going to determine the name of the new FBI headquarters. In 1972, following J. Edgar Hoover's death, and before much was known about some of the illegal activities he engaged in, Congress passed a bill to name the existing building as the J. Edgar Hoover Building. J. Edgar Hoover did not uphold the laws of this nation, the U.S. Constitution, or the standard of justice in many instances. It's absolutely inappropriate that our nation's leading federal law enforcement agency building still be named in his honor. Director Hoover was notorious for his regular abuses against and prejudice towards civil rights leaders, LGBTQ people, and African Americans at large. From his creation of the Counterintelligence Program, or COINTELPRO, which was a secret program aimed to, quote, expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or other neutralize the activities of black nationalists, hate-type organizations, to his FBI, quote, sex deviance, unquote, program. He had a little thing about gays. He didn't look in the mirror very often, but he had a thing about gays. That nationalist hate type organizations to his FBI, he used them to attack and out LGBTQ employees in the federal government. Director Hoover symbolized the dangers of the weaponization of the federal government. He weaponized the federal government like never before and held much incriminating data about presidents, which some suggest is why he kept his position for so long. Relocation of the FBI building presents an excellent opportunity to release the FBI and its headquarters building from Director Hoover's tarnished reputation and instead pursue a building name that will appropriately honor the administration of justice. We're privileged in Congress to have dinners that are sponsored by David Rubenstein at the Library of Congress, and the last one I attended, the last one held, was a lady who wrote a biography of J. Edgar Hoover. She worked on it for 15 years, 800 pages. She had very little good to say about him because of his misdeeds. Is it Dooms? Thank you, sir. The GSA administrator, as I understand it, has the authority to name buildings, but typically looks to Congress for direction. I introduced H.R. 1175 this year, and I've introduced a similar bill for many years, which would redesignate the J. Edgar Hoover Federal Building as the Federal Bureau of Investigation Building. Given that the 1972 law expressly renamed the building constructed in downtown, would the old name convey to the newly reconstructed FBI building, or will only receive a name when Congress designates a name and the GSA adopts it?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. The expectation is that if the building comes down, GSA would defer to Congress to a new building and how it's named.
Thank you, sir. That would be appropriate, and I appreciate the clarity. It's important that the old name not carry over. The FBI needs to be respected as an agency that does carry out its duties of being fair and just in administering justice. And what happened in Martin Luther King and his phone being tapped and the messages that were sent to him by the FBI suggesting he should commit suicide because they had more information on him, which Mrs. King wouldn't want to know about, et cetera. What they did in Chicago when they killed Black Panthers, they put the set up with insiders and killed Black Panthers in Chicago. And it looks like something happened with Malcolm X. His convicted murderers have been released because they didn't do it. Who knows what else he did? Commissioner, I have one other question. It's my understanding that in October of 2022, the GSA requested authorization to lease space for an FBI field office in Nashville. It is also my understanding the committee has not considered that request. Can you explain the request for space and the current status of the procurement?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. I want to be careful here because that procurement is ongoing, but it has been advertised. The contracting officer has 3 offers on the table, but GSA will not proceed until this committee provides a resolution in support of that prospectus, at which point we would be able to make an award and move forward on that project in Tennessee. But I welcome the opportunity to let Mr. Demos fill in.
No, thank you, Mr. Dooms. Thank you for the question, sir. This is a very important project for us. Congress approved the consolidation of our Knoxville and Memphis field offices into a consolidated Nashville field office in 2019. And so the actual ability to award the construction project in Nashville is critically important for our employees who are already expecting that kind of transition to Nashville. And so this has been a 5-year plus endeavor. And so we would definitely appreciate your support, the committee's support, and if there are any questions that the committee has regarding the Tennessee consolidation effort, we'd be happy to schedule a follow-on discussion at a time that's best for you, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I do have to say I felt there was great discrimination in the decision to take the headquarters to consolidate in Nashville. It was obviously prejudiced in favor of hot chicken over barbecue. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair thanks the gentleman. I'm going to go to a second round here. Mr. Dooms, as you probably and likely know, this committee had requested Ms. Albert be present for her testimony, and fortunately or unfortunately, you're here. and I wouldn't say instead, but you're the one that's on the hot seat to speak on behalf of whatever might have happened. So I got some questions for you in that regard, and they're not personal, but the July 2023 update included changes to the Site Selection Authority, shifting it from the Public Building Service Commissioner to the Commissioner, the Public Building Service Commissioner. This change occurred 2 years after the appointment of Ms. Albert, meaning the GSA affirmatively chose to remove an impartial PBS regional commissioner and replace them with Ms. Albert, an individual they knew had worked for WMATA, the landowner of one of the 3 potential sites and the one that was chosen. Now, I say replace Ms. Albert with an individual that they knew worked for WMATA, or replace the regional commissioner, the impartial regional commissioner. I think that the regional commissioner was impartial because on the previous report, I know you don't have it in front of you, but I'm showing it to you, the name of that person is redacted, right? They don't want any trouble for doing what the right thing is, making the site selection based on the criteria. It seems to me that Ms. Albert was brought in to fix the situation, to get the result that was wanted. That's why, after 2 years, she brought into this whole process and airdropped right into the middle of it. And then 2.5 months later, the announcement was made. The criteria was changed to get the site selection that they wanted, and the decision was made. Who decided to make the change regarding Miss Albert, knowing that she had a potential conflict of interest? Who made that decision?
Congressman, thank you for that question. GSA made that decision, so I believe it may have been the Site Selection Authority herself that made that decision, but I'll have to get back to you.
So you're saying the person that's name was redacted here made the decision to replace themselves with Miss Albert? Is that what you're saying?
The Site Selection Authority is the top real estate official within GSA. We knew when we were making this decision, there was going to be a lot of scrutiny. Someone was going to be unhappy, either Maryland
the top real estate official, and you knew at the time that Miss Albert hasn't had a real estate license, never sat for the exam, doesn't possess a real estate license, but you took the top real estate official out and put Miss Albert in, and you're saying the Site Selection Authority at GSA did that. That's what you're saying?
I'll need to clarify as to.
I hope you do. I'm wondering, was there any outside input into that decision from anyone in the Maryland elected delegation or the Virginia delegation or OMB? Was there anybody from either one of those 3 entities, delegations, elected delegation in Maryland, Virginia, or the Office of Management and Budget that weighed in on that decision to replace that person with Miss Albert, knowing there was a conflict of interest?
Congressman, what I'll say is the head of GSA heard from members of the Maryland and Virginia delegation throughout the year about what their concerns were.
What was the tenor of those conversations?
I think both delegations wanted their site to be chosen.
Were you involved? Were you involved in those conversations?
No, sir.
Do you know of any of those conversations directly with Miss Albert?
Certainly, and I'm not aware that the Site Selection Authority heard herself directly. I was referring to the administrator, who I know heard from both delegations.
So the administrator, but you can't confirm whether Miss Albert heard from the delegation or not?
Sir, I'm unable to provide an answer to that question.
Did the administrator, having heard from the delegations and possibly OMB, is the administrator that made these change to Miss Albert?
So I want to be careful here to make sure I understand your question, sir. Could you please?
I want to know who made the decision and what their involvement was with elected officials in Maryland and Virginia, or potentially the OMB.
I'll have to get back to you on that one, sir.
All right. Are you aware that the general manager for WMATA, the transit agency that services the DC metro area, has just announced the closure of 10 sites, 67 bus routes, 2,000 employees losing their jobs due to lack of funding. Do you know if one of the potential closures of those 10 sites is the Greenbelt site?
No, sir.
Would that affect the decision if it were to close?
I would have to consult with staff on that and get back to you.
Before I recognize the ranking member, I'm just going to tell you, I used to have this old truck that sat in my tractor shed, and rodents would get into it because it was just sitting out in the tractor shed. I didn't use it very much. But I would get in it, and I could smell that they were in there. I could smell the rat because they got a certain smell about them when they're inhabiting the place. The American people smell a rat here. They smell a rat, Mr. Dooms. Unfortunately, you're here to answer for GSA. I'm not sure you're the right person. We got to get to the bottom of what happened here because this does not fulfill the FBI's mission. There's crazy business with us subsidizing WMATA, who apparently now appears to be subsidizing the FBI. At the same time, they're getting ready to lay off 2,000 employees because they can't pay their bills. They don't have any money to be subsidizing anybody. What we should be focused on here is the mission of the FBI and what best enhances that. And none of these sites, not one of these sites, and this is not on you, this is on Congress, but not one of these sites, according to the expert here, Mr. Demos, services the mission of the FBI. With that, I yield to the ranking member, General Lady from Nevada.
Thank you. I would just ask you, Mr. Dooms, the GSA's objective is to build the fastest and the cheapest, or to rent the fastest and the cheapest. Aren't there a couple of facilities that exist now on the Springfield site that would have to be taken down, like a warehouse or something, before they could even start preparing that site for construction? Wouldn't that make it longer, take longer, and cost more?
Yes, Congresswoman. Actually, that was contemplated in the site selection decision. Currently on the Springfield site, there is a rather large warehouse, 1 million square feet, in which we hold personal property that is excess to the government needs. There's also a classified tenant on the property as well. And both of those facilities would have to be moved. And there are costs associated with moving both of those tenants. And that was one of the things that was under consideration. In fact, that's one of the things the Site Selection Authority considered, project certainty. And project certainty involves how soon, how quickly, and how costly it would be to move the existing tenants on the Springfield site.
Have y'all decided where you would move those, or you got to figure that out next?
That would be the next part of the process, to figure out exactly where those tenants would move. I believe there is a site for the classified tenant, and they're going through that process. But for the unclassified tenant, we are putting together those plans now.
And it's not associated with the FBI in any way. It's just something else GSA has.
No, it is unrelated to the FBI.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Demos, in the Department of Justice OIG report issued in October, it's mentioned that the FBI had concerns about, in 2017, about the Greenbelt site due to the presence of wetlands and limited constructible space. Does the FBI maintain these concerns, especially now that it's been announced that the Greenbelt site has been selected, and will the Greenbelt site fully accommodate the consolidation of FBI headquarters and potential future expansion?
Thank you for the question, Chairman. All 3 sites were deemed viable to be able to support the FBI.
I know that they were deemed viable. You're representing the FBI. You're not representing the other people on the panel, Congress, that trying to force these 3 sites down the FBI's throat. What does the FBI say?
Because of the site size and the challenges of the wetlands, it does create construction challenges that we would have to work through the program of requirements process. It's not unachievable, but it's a construction challenge.
Do you think it'd increase the cost? I know you're not a constructor, right? You probably don't build things.
We would have to rely on developers to help us with those cost estimates, sir.
Well, I suspect it would increase the cost. Mr. Dooms, Did the GSA seek an opinion from the Office of Government Ethics or the Department of Justice and/or the Department of Justice regarding Ms. Albert's appointment as a source selection authority given her previous employment at Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. GSA did seek the opinion of the Office of General Counsel of GSA to address this issue of the Site Selection Authority's previous employment. Just to give you a timeline, in July of 2021, the Site Selection Authority was appointed as the PBS Commissioner. Shortly thereafter, she was granted a limited authorization to work on all matters related to WMATA and in particular the FBI headquarters. So this was contemplated nearly 9 months before Congress down-selected to the 3 sites that were under consideration.
When did the GSA seek the opinion from the Office of Government Ethics or the Department of Justice, based on what you just told me? When did they seek that?
Congressman, I don't believe they sought the opinion of the Office of Government Ethics. This was an internal opinion offered by the Office of General Counsel for GSA, rendered in July of 2021.
July of 21, they rendered that decision, that opinion. You have a copy of that for this panel?
Yes, I have a copy, and I'm more than willing to share it with the committee.
I hope so. All right. Mr. Dooms, when does GSA plan to submit a prospectus to the committee for the new FBI headquarters building?
Congressman, GSA intends to follow the law. In the fiscal year 2022 appropriations bill, we were directed to share information consistent with the prospectus within 180 days of selecting a site.
Within 180 days, so that 180-day clock started in September when it was announced. Is that correct?
Correct, Congressman.
All right. I thank the witnesses. Are there any further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I'd like to thank each of the